So just as a refresher, and we would need to talk about energy systems because that's pretty much what training zones are representing. So Will, do you want to give us a quick overview of what you talked about with energy systems?
Yeah, so we've got the phosphagen system, the anaerobic energy system, and the aerobic system. And they all have sort of their time thresholds, I guess, to use that word threshold again. The phosphagen system, or PCR, phosphocreatine system, is like, it's super short, 10 seconds or less, 100-meter sprint. It's really just a matter of getting the energy as quick as possible, hopefully before the other energy systems are able to catch up, because there is going to be a delay. The start of a race, you don't have enough oxygen. Hopefully you've warmed up, but you potentially don't have enough oxygen to be able to provide the energy that is required to get off the start line, especially in something like a triathlon swim start or a mountain bike start. But we get through to going along the right of the graph, the anaerobic system, and that's, we're looking at 1 to 2 minutes max for the maximal contribution of an anaerobic system. And then we get through to the aerobic system, the bread and butter of endurance sports. And then we're able to use zones to try and train these specific systems, the crossover points of these systems, and help to develop a full holistic endurance athlete. So that's really how we're using the energy systems in relation to zones.
Yeah, so it's pretty predictable for the people that invented zones and us as coaches, scientists, to understand that when we prescribe exercise within a certain zones, that what's happening in that intensity realm is that we're giving the demands on the body to these certain energy systems. So we know that if we're going easy for 5 hours, we're probably stressing the aerobic system almost completely. So we're not getting much of a contribution as far as energy goes from the PCR system unless we're sprinting within that 5 hours. But we know that, well, since that energy system only lasts about 10 seconds, there's not going to be a huge contribution within that 5-hour ride from the PCR system, even if we do 110-second sprints. And that's because that energy system takes a really long time to recover. So when we're prescribing training and we say zone 2, zone 1, zone 5, we know where the demands are coming from. And we'll get into that as we go through this module.
Yeah, and really, it's just kind of the agreed science, which we need to understand when we start to overlay zones into these energy systems. We want to go, okay, look, this is the way the body works, and this is the way we're able to convert oxygen and our food sources into usable forms of energy. And these are the approximate times that represent these energy systems, and also there are crossover points. So it's not a hard science, like in terms of, at 10 seconds, the PCR system will completely stop. But there are the predominance of those energy systems, and we just need to understand that so that when we apply zones over top of that, we all know what those zones are trying to achieve and what they represent, like metabolically.
Exactly. And I sometimes think about the poor postdoc or whatever that created training zones, because they're so precise, right? Like 87% of your threshold is the upper end of this zone. And what we know, there probably were thousands of participants in these studies that were designed to make these zones. And there would have been some outliers, right? So the zones aren't perfect for everyone. But as we know, they're great guidelines, and that's why we stick with them.
Speaking of poor postdoc students, what about this guy?
Yes. So we all know functional threshold power, FTP, and cyclists are going to use this. Do you guys use this in running, FTP?
Critical power.
Okay. So we'll talk about how those are so related soon. But when I first started my career in science, I was thinking, what does FTP mean? The steady state. So the way we measure FTP is we go out and we do a 20-minute time trial or an 8-minute time trial. We go as hard as we can, and we take the average power throughout that test, and we multiply it by 0.95 or 0.9, and then we get something that represents our lactate threshold pretty much, and then we use that to set our zones. And we're using this to gauge our ability, right? I was looking at this,
like pacing especially, and zones. Yeah, as we'll get into
zones and as a benchmark, right? So what mountain bikers and everyone runners will do, you'll say, well, did my critical power improve? Yeah, my critical power improved. So that means I'm a better athlete. And I was thinking about this for mountain biking. I was like, there's no way that this actually means anything this functional threshold power means anything for mountain biking, because mountain biking is so off and on. You go hard, then you go easy. You go hard, and then you go easy for hours, right? I was like, there's no way the steady state power means anything for mountain biking. So what we did is we got real tricky, and we had, I think it was a dozen mountain bikers do FTP tests. And then we randomized it, proper science here. I was going around to people's houses doing proper science in their basements. And then what we did is we developed this intermittent power test. And this was 45 seconds as hard as you could go and 15 seconds rest for 20 minutes. It was horrible. And
Sounds horrible.
Dude, maybe we should do it sometime.
Right? I'd rather not.
But I thought, yes, this definitely represents mountain biking from all the power files we analyzed. I thought this is going to make way more sense. So if we try and predict how fast someone goes around a mountain bike track, because it's so off and on, this intermittent power test is going to predict time way better. And it turned out, unfortunately, it was only a little bit better at predicting how fast the mountain bikers would go. But the reason for that is because this aerobic level of fitness is so important for even intermittent sports. So even though it was a little bit better, we could predict time a little bit better with the intermittent power test. The intermittent power test and the FTP levels were so related to each other that they were almost the exact same thing. So if you had a really high FTP, you were also really good at doing intermittent power. And that's when I started to realize how important aerobic fitness was. And this FTP, representing the upper limit of the aerobic fitness, that's when I realized, okay, well, this is the real deal.